I've never been much of an ocean person. I think the ocean is fascinating, and you could argue I've dedicated much of my adult life to studying and protecting water and its inhabitants. When I say I'm not an ocean person, I mean that I've never felt drawn to the ocean like many people. I'm assuming this is largely due to spending months at a time camping around the interior with my family as a kid. Alpine meadows are my favorite landscape. You can be surrounded by thousands of acres of reds, blues, purples, yellows, and greens, while the cool mountain air cascades down from an unseen glacier or meandering stream, refreshing you under the hot July sun. Such majesty has filled me with enough satisfaction that I've never needed the ocean to fill any wild niche. Plus, there's a lot of creepy shit in the ocean that I don't have time for. However, when an opportunity presented itself to take a week off when it was still too early to get into the mountains, I decided I would use the time to find out what this ocean business was all about. This trip consisted of 2 main parts, and similarly this is part 1 of a 2-part story. The first part consists of a camping trip with a handful of old high school buddies, herein the boys, to Texada Island, just off the coast of Powell River. If you haven't seen my video about Powell River yet, click the link at the top of this video to learn about this awesome little community. Part 2 will be about when James and I separate from the group and head over to the northwestern tip of Vancouver Island. When we left the lower mainland early Friday morning, I couldn't begin to fathom the experiences that awaited us, and how drastically it would change my perception of what Vancouver Island really is. Part 1 of this video is about my trip camping with the boys on Texada Island, which is the biggest island between the mainland and Vancouver Island, just across the water from Powell River. There are only about 1,200 people living on Texada, leaving most of it as uninhabited wilderness. Texada Island is a unique place. It has an incredible history of mining metals and limestone all the way back to the 1800s, right up to today. It has a few abandoned rock quarries as well as an abandoned whaling station that you can walk around in. It takes a long time and a fair amount of money to get there from Vancouver, so it's not really a destination hotspot for the weekend warriors of the lower mainland. On the day we were headed up, the ferry out of Horseshoe Bay was booked until 4:20 in the afternoon, 3 weeks in advance. So we booked ourselves onto that ferry and decided to show up as early as we could to see if we could board an earlier one. So we convened at James's house bright and early on Friday morning, loaded up the vehicles buzzing with excitement, and made our way to the ferry. As luck would have it, there was space when we showed up at 9:40 for the 9:45 sailing. We bought our tickets and rolled right on. I didn't even have time to hit record on my dash cam. And that was the first miracle of what proved to be 9 days of good luck, good vibes, and amazing experiences. Instead of getting into Powell River at 8:30 at night as we initially predicted, we were at our first campsite on Texada by 4 p.m. as the sun broke through the clouds. Spirits were high as we set up our camp and I stuck my GoPro in people's faces. We got an amazing spot with the ocean just on the other side of a small slope. The apes that I was camping with were intrigued by the wildlife camera I had set up amid their foraging grounds. Mackenzie, the professional chef and butcher of the group, prepped us an amazing meal of taters, asparagus, shallots, and a meat triangle, the tastiest of shapes.
The master chef observes his taters as they cook gently within the hot coals.
Watching Mackenzie cook definitely entertained us.
This is for me for later.
Yeah,
this
right.
Is...
In the tent.
Later on, here's
While the sun set, we cracked some beers and dug into our 5-star dinner. By this point, it had gotten too dark to film. I could feel our natural roots taking hold. A group of guys away from home, sitting around a fire, talking shit, eating flame-grilled meat, and preparing for an adventure in the wilderness. After having our fill of a gourmet backcountry meal in front of the fire, we went down to the water. Unfortunately, it was too dark for the camera to be able to pick up the extent of the bioluminescent and phytoplankton we saw that night. I don't want to dwell on it too long, but understand that I've never seen such a bright instance of it in all my years of searching out this enchanting phenomenon. This was the second stroke of luck of the trip, and we hadn't even been gone for 24 hours. The next 2 nights on Texada, we camped at a long, shallow inlet on the south end of the island. To get there, a person needs a high-clearance 4x4 vehicle. Luckily, we had 3. For a couple of the guys, it was their first time doing any off-roading, and they summed it up better than I ever could. They said, "It's like hiking indoors. It's nice having people around that can put things into words better than you can." When we rolled up to the inlet, our minds were blown. Even though it was raining really hard on our way down, by the time we got there, it had cleared up really nicely. There was also a really nice campsite, but to access it, we had to cross a creek, which we had no problems with. The cherry on top was that there was not another person in sight. Nobody. Not a single person. After setting up camp, we did some quick exploration to see what the next day had in store for us. But there was no way we could have been prepared for what we were about to experience. There isn't really any way to describe the experience we had that day. Walking along the bluffs, looking back over to the mainland, poking around in tide pools, finding a dead bird of prey, and watching the sea life all sound like a standard day on the coast. Maybe there was something in the air or the food that we ate, but we were buzzing the whole time. There were beaches on either side of the small peninsula, separated by a small wooded area and bluffs sticking out into the ocean. One of the beaches was exposed to the Strait of Georgia, and thus battered by bigger waves and more wind, giving it a much more chaotic and wild feeling. It was a bit of a route-finding exercise to get there, but with the blue skies and view of the ocean, none of us were complaining. The other beach was protected by the peninsula and thus had no wind, calm waters, and the warm spring sun to energize our souls. In this inlet, there were large rocks covered in tide pools teeming with snails, hermit crabs, and other invertebrates. The much more protected feel allowed us to relax in the sun and inspect the tiny organisms. Having a waterproof GoPro was awesome, as it allowed me to delve right into the tide pools and get a unique view of that underwater world, turning microscopic into macroscopic. In the wooded area of the peninsula, there were giant arbutus trees, much bigger than any arbutus I had seen before. The whole scene was something you would expect to see in an exotic tropical destination. We carried on hiking up to the tip of the peninsula, where we had a 270-degree view of the ocean. While we were standing up there, in awe of our surroundings, unable to comprehend where we were, just to prove to us that it could get better, a pod of orcas surfaced for a breath of air. Their gigantic dorsal fins breached the crisp blue water only a few times before disappearing below the surface. I'm not ashamed to say, we lost our minds a little bit. Oh, there they are!
Oh man!
Oh my god! I don't believe in a higher power, or destiny, or fate. But sometimes you can't help but wonder if there are signs telling you that you are right where you're supposed to be. After calming down after seeing the whales, the tide had gone out and had exposed a previously unreachable island, which obviously meant we had to climb it. Mackenzie, being a cook, noted that he could smell onions and quickly pulled some from the ground. Another tropical-like location for us to bathe in the promise of the upcoming summer. The whole trip on Texada was, for lack of a better term, a spiritual experience. I believe guys should have guy time. The chance to get out, be silly, share some beers, climb rocks, cook meat on an open fire, and appreciate the camaraderie of fellow man. We sang, we danced, we pissed off cliffs. The connections I have with those boys will certainly last a lifetime. When we packed up and headed back to Powell River, James and I struggled to see how our already amazing vacation had only just finished its first act. I couldn't even begin to imagine the world we were about to enter and the experiences we would have over the following 5 days. We might as well have been preparing to go to the moon. I was honestly kind of afraid that the trip may have already peaked, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Here's just a little taste of what awaited us. You can see more in the follow-up to this video, where I recount my trip with James into the wilds of Northern Vancouver Island.